What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the new best builds tier list in Path of Exile 2 Dawn of the Hunt. So finally we got the new 2.0 patch notes, and to say that I'm very surprised would be an underestimate. To give you a quick preview in few seconds, then well, all concoction builds got a huge nerf. Then surprisingly crossbows are now slightly buffed and seem to be climbing the top ranks of most tier lists. Also, you can say bye to Hexblast and herald skills, as they no longer trigger from kills caused by it. So builds like the stat stacking, falling thunder and pretty much most other monks got nerfed. And if you're interested in what happened to the sorceress builds, deadeyes, witches and etc, then stick till the end, because the new patch notes really seem to be changing the whole meta in a completely different direction. Also, if you're interested in buying other PC or console games with 50 or 70% discount, then check out Instant Gaming. For example, I want to buy Elden Ring, so we just click on Add to Cart, then click Pay, then input our details and pay. After payment is complete, we will receive activation key, then copy and paste the key in, and it's that simple. So what are you waiting for? Click my link description and check out Instant Gaming for yourself. So let's start off with the D tier, and our first contender is the Hammer of the Gods Chronomancer. Simply put, this build completely and utterly got destroyed and nerfed. This was not the most popular build in the previous meta, but I did see few people making it work quite well. But now it seems completely nerfed to the lowest ground possible. So if you were thinking about the Hammer of the Gods, then rethink your decision. This Chrono build usually was focused on powerful melee attacks with Divine themed hammer, dealing very high AoE damage. It typically scales with fire damage, physical conversion and crits, which previously made it very strong for clearing and bossing. Next in the D tier we have most if not all grenade builds. For them nothing much changed. They still, like per the old tier list, have been pretty much untouched and don't keep seeing any upgrades or even downgrades if possible. Like you've seen from my previous videos, grenades just take way too much time to activate, and to make them work devs really need to shorten the time it takes to detonate them, or make new passives or gems that would either way speed up, make the blast radius somehow concentrate on a single target, or pretty much anything else but what they have done right now. Next we have C tier, and our first build is the Hexblast Blood Mage. To be honest, this applies to the most Hexblast builds, and yes, as you can see, they got big nerfs as well. If previously I placed Hexblast somewhere around in the middle to the higher tiers in my tier lists, then now they've fallen quite a bit. Their setup is structured around using the Hexblast in combination with other chaos skills that will curse and explode enemies in very wide area. The main gameplay idea behind our setup is to one-shot most enemies, and as they die they will continuously replenish our life and energy shield. Next up we have Poisonous Concoction build, and like I explained in my intro, all concoction builds got a huge nerf. If previously they were fighting for A and S tier, then now they've fallen to the C or potentially B tier, but we'll have to wait and see. In short, the new patch increased their build up to 200% instead of the previous 100%, so they pretty much nerfed concoction by 100%, plus they changed flask timing as well. Your main gameplay loop revolves around just running around in a map and using nothing more than just the poisonous concoction. Monsters will die very fast because of the poison that gets spread to them from the contagious concoction ascendancy passive. Next up we have the Shattering concoction, and he's also in the CE tier. It works very similar to the poisonous concoction, just in a different setup and form. The setup pretty much just runs insanely fast and throws out freeze bottles at your enemies that explode through hundreds of targets and one-shots them in split seconds. We are going to be doing about 5 million DPS with a fully maximized gear, and also you're able to permafreeze mobs and pinnacle bosses, which will give us a very easy playstyle, as we won't have to worry about the enemies too much. And now for the last C tier we got the Ice Sorceress build. This setup was pretty much untouched and is also more commonly known as the Comet build, that was popular and strong in the first month of the release, but after its initial nerf it hasn't seen a light of day ever since. Barely anyone plays her, as it just wakes too long for the ice comets to explode, and the new damage and timers are just not good enough to make it truly powerful. However, cold penetration and cold exposure work incredibly well together, so this build works great on big groups of enemies where we simply use 2-skill combo and cover our entire screen with frost projectiles. Next up we have B tier, and for the first build we got pretty much all the Spark Sorceress builds. So devs nerfed more specifically the Storm Weavers, which to honestly say did not surprise me, as Spark Sorceress builds and pretty much all the Sorc builds were completely dominating the meta. However, they did not completely nerf them, so they're still viable, although they can compete in their previous S and A tiers. The setup is super fun and has insane amount of lightning damage, and as you can see, you will paralyze and destroy monsters with a barrage of lightning. And the Archmage with the lightning condiant and the spark skulls together will make up for your bulk DPS. Next we have most, if not all, demon form builds. So in short, they did nerf them, but not entirely, and at least at the moment, it's not a good idea to use them for leveling. However, how they will perform in endgame we'll just have to wait and see. This particular setup's main focus is to scale fire from our attacks and target big enemy groups, to then set them on fire and explode. We are going to be taking advantage of the seemingly limitless power of the demon and the passive damage of the fire skills, so you will start maps in the demon form, and kill enemies while its effect ramps up to 70 or 100 stacks, which then we have to disable the demon form and then instantly reapply it, to start the demon flame ramp up once more. Next we have the Ice Jack Monk build, and he's also in the B tier. They could potentially fight for the A tier, but again we'll have to wait and see. The on-kill effect of the herald skill can no longer trigger from the kills cast by it, so this and other nerfs massively affected the Ice Monk builds. This setup's main focus is to lock down your enemies with quick freezes that last a long time. Even bosses were vulnerable to being frozen, as you could just lay down insane amount of DPS while they were stuck doing absolutely no damage. Next we have Permafrost Witchhunter, and as crossbows got buffed, so he moved up a tier. This setup is very unique because we are going to be freezing enemies with the Permafrost bolts, which will give us frost fires, so then we will be able to drop explosive grenades and then detonate them with explosive shot, which will do massive amounts of damage. This build is great against bosses and other large enemy groups, as we can CC the enemy while our fuse is going on, and then we can detonate our AoE skills, which will see a huge explosion. Next up in the B tier we have the Tempest Flurry build. This setup also is more known as the stat stacker. Our main gameplay is to stack as much strength, dexterity and intelligence as possible, but then scale it with our unique items such as the Pillar of the Cage God and Hand of the Wisdom in Action. One of the best things about this setup is that all it needs to function at the start is the Pillar of the Cage God, which is pretty affordable on a budget, but then later on we can scale it incredibly high with a massive power upgrade. Next up we have the Flicker Strike Monk build, who's also in the B tier. This build focuses on the Flicker Strike, which generates massive amounts of frenzy charges from the combat frenzy, which we then can even further convert the power of the charges with our resonance keystone. Every time we have the power charges, we can spend them on the Flicker Strike, to basically fly through multiple screens of enemies like you can see from the gameplay. And next we got Shattering Invoker, and he's also in the B tier. As similarly to the previous monk builds, the herald skill nerf affected him as well. This setup is focused around applying stacking explosive effects to enemies with the melee attacks. Each hit will build up Shattering charge, which then detonates when the enemy dies or recharges a threshold, dealing massive AoE damage. It typically scales with attack speed, cold damage and crits, which makes it great for clearing groups of enemies. And now for the last B tier we got the Poison Gemling Legionnaire build, but to be honest we could also place here the Decomposed Pathfinder. So this setup focuses on summoning legionnaires that rapidly attack and apply poison stacks to the enemies. It scales with attack speed, poison duration and chaos damage, which makes it very strong for sustained damage over time. The build typically uses an aura support, minion damage scaling and wither stacks to boost the poison effects to a massive amount. Next we have A tier, and for the first one we got the Corrupting Cry Warbringer. Every patch seems to buff warriors slightly, and this time it happened again, because of the Thunder Armor and Physical Damage / Armor Breaker buffs. This build is pretty much a big AoE warrior that focuses on armor breaking offensively, and then the block defensively. Our main playstyle will revolve around using the Stampede skill, which will charge our character forwards and create patches of the jagged ground, which then are exploded when the final slam portion of our ability is executed. Next in the A tier, we got the Fireball Sorceress build. This build's main idea is built around putting up a frost wall and then blasting enemies with the infinite amount of fireballs. Cold exposure in the combination with the fire skills is very OP, and this build will work better as the Ice Sorceress, because for one, we are not using slow comet skills, but also because the fire effect and range for this setup is much more spammier, thus we can scale our DPS quite high with the right build. Next in the A tier we have the Frost Mage Witch build. This setup utilizes Skeletal Frost Mages by buffing them insanely high, so then we can do a huge amount of damage in return. They also will freeze enemies and bosses, so most horde content will be like a walk in the park. This build's greatest strength is its primary defense, so we will have a massive amount of energy shield, and by using the Grim Feast we will double it, so in the endgame we will be able to reach up to 30,000 energy shields. Next in the A tier we got the Fire Warrior build. This setup focuses on melee attacks, infused with the fire damage, which deals burning and explosive AoE attacks. It scales with attack speed, fire penetration and ignite damage, which makes it very strong for both single target and AoE damage. This build often utilizes war cries, fire themed buffs and elemental resistances. Next in the A tier we got the Minion Spirit Witch build. This setup summons raging spirits by casting the Flame Wall for offense, and then also for defense we got to command the minion army. So unlike most other setups, we are not only commanding or casting spells, but in this one we get to do both, and does increase our DPS even higher. By using specific gear and building our skill tree around the nodes like the Power of the Dead, Fear the Dead, Silent Guard and many more, it will enable us to upgrade our minions and projectile area and damage. Next up we got the Totem Warrior build. This is the best warrior build by far. This setup's main focus is to run and press from 1 to 2 skills, and then target big enemy groups to then weaken them and explode. One of the most powerful skills that we have in our arsenal is the Shockwave Totem, which does incredible amount of AoE damage, and as you can see from the gameplay, we are just running into enemies and one-shotting them without even trying. And now for the last A tier we got the Skeletal Sniper Witch build. This setup is known as the Detonate the Dead minion build that mainly uses the Skeletal Arsonist for both AoE and single target damage, while then further increasing our DPS by casting Detonate the Dead, which explodes dead enemy corpses and lets us speed farm every single content in the game. This build is the best of both worlds, because it combines very quick clearing speed with aggressive playstyle while also having minions that protect you, and at the endgame we will be able to reach from 15 to 30,000 energy shield, which will basically turn us into an unstoppable puppet master. Next we have S tier, and surprisingly enough we have now Bonestorm in the top ranks. This setup is structured around using the skill Bonestorm, which by itself is a slow clearing ability, but with the right gems, passives and synergies we can make it much better. And this is exactly what we have right here. This build also has 2 variants, both of these excel at different things, so which one you choose is up to you. The full crit chance setup will excel at huge amount of damage. You won't be focusing on anything else besides the massive crits and stacking as much life as possible, because the more life we have, the more damage we can do in return. Next we got Explosive Shot Deadeye, and with no changes to the deadeyes themselves and bunch of buffs to the crossbows, then now he's moved up to the S tier, but also he could potentially drop to the A tier in the endgame. This setup is structured around using Explosive Shot, which will proc bunch of buffs like the Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice and Herald of Ash, which will all create massive explosions and give you the ability to clear entire screens of mobs in just few seconds. But as we lack in single target damage, so for that reason we're also going to be using the Shock Burst rounds that will delete enemies insanely quickly. Next in the S tier, we got the Ice Shot Deadeye build. This setup uses the Ice Shot in combination with the Lightning Rod and Blink, which will give us this insane mobility and speed farming potential. What I like most about this setup that we can simply spam one single skill and pretty much destroy tier 16 maps and reach up to 5 million DPS because of how many buffs we have working in the background. Like you can see from the gameplay, we're basically deleting enemies in split seconds, and on top of this we can also delete bosses by us having also very high boss damage from using the Lightning Rod and the Orb of Storms. And now finally in the S tier we got the Lightning Arrow Ranger build. This build is currently one of the best and fastest setups that you can use for leveling, farming maps and other endgame content. Like you can see from the gameplay, we are basically deleting enemies in split seconds, and on top of this we can also delete bosses by having also a very high boss damage and using the Cast on Shock and Ball Lightning. The 2.0 update didn't change deadeyes whatsoever, so this build is still at the top of the ranks. And with that said, let me know what you think about these builds in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, then you definitely don't want to miss my previous top 3 best builds video, where I showed even more powerful builds in the new update. So click the screen now and I'll see you in the next one.